One of the main themes presented in the reading is about differentiating truth from fallacy. As media literate users, we must be able to critically analyze and critique the credentials of publications. This ability will allow users to discover the truth for themselves. What Dan Gilmore teaches us is to take nothing at face value. We can never take it for granted that what we read, see, or hear from media sources of any kind is trustworthy. The only rational approach then is skepticism. What is presented within the media is not always true. So what does it mean to trust, particularly in terms of media? If trust in the therapist matters in the success of the therapeutic process, trust in the nurse has implications for the well-being of the patient, then trust in media should also matter for people's interaction with and exposure to news media. If we cannot trust, then how can we know that everything is true, and how can we be sure that we are provided with enough information? Fukuyama defined trust as the expectation that arises within a community of regular, honest, and cooperative behavior based on commonly shared norms. Those norms can be about deep value questions like the nature of God or justice, but they also encompass regular norms like professional standards and codes of behavior, specifically those of media and the honesty within journalism. When trust occurs, there is no empirical way for the trustor to verify the intentions of the character of the trustee. Trust is the expectation that the interactions with the trustee will lead to gains rather than losses with the truster. We should be able to expect that journalists provide us with information that is accurate, that we are gaining real factual knowledge, rather than being lied to or at least presented with incorrect data. So if we cannot trust, then what? The answer is media skepticism, and this is the perception that journalists do not always live by their professional standards. Journalists are not fair and objective in their reports, that they do not always tell the whole story, and that they would sacrifice accuracy and precision for personal gains. If we apply the principles of general trust to news media context, we expect people who are skeptical towards the mainstream media to have less mainstream news as a part of their media diets. We assume that these people who do not trust these outlets will not be using them. Yet they do. There are skeptics who watch. Media skeptics are somewhat less exposed to the mainstream news channels on average, but they still get much of their current affairs information from media sources that they mistrust. So the skeptics who watch must understand why skepticism is necessary. The biggest reason is media sensationalism. Media sensationalism is exactly why we cannot always trust everything that is presented to us. Sensationalism is a type of editorial bias in mass media in which events and topics and news stories and pieces are overhyped to increase viewership. This means that they deliberately provide emotions and are controversial and intentionally omit facts and information just to gain readers. Media sensationalism is the biggest reason that we must stay skeptic and not take everything at face value. The human sensitivity to this kind of information explains why both journalists and their audience pay so much attention to deviant or bad news. We are drawn to this, and media understands this and knows this. And that is why we must be able to determine whether there is sensationalism in front of us or whether there is truth.
My name is Deanna Bukowski, and I'm going to talk about knowing the difference between ignorance on the web and finding the truth. Dan Gilmore, I think, was mostly trying to say in these chapters was be skeptical about what media you read, but don't be over-cynical over media today. Before I get to Dan Gilmore and Media Active, I'm going to talk about some of the academic journals that I researched. And one was about a digital divide. It was from two professors from Malaysia. I have the lovely site right down there. And there's an access divide, skills divide, economic opportunity divide, and the democratic divide. It just talks about education, technical competence, and people with computer knowledge to know how they work with their materials and how well they can actually put a media site out there and if it would be credible or not. But then also, I found another journal that talks about the different levels of trust, and this is how you can look at a website and see how you can trust it. You can be trusted news information. If you hear a completely bizarre story, you should probably look more into it. You can also be trusted those to deliver the news. I mean, as me, I would much rather believe a friend than I would a teacher, but usually you should stick with a more credible source. And trust the media corporations. You would most likely trust New York Times over a tabloid. Then finally moving on to Dan Gilmore, Media Active. Even a good journalist is capable of small or large flaws. It's very true. So a lot of journalists do things to get to people and or get their story out first. There's two-side fallacies, and this is kind of like there's more than two sides to one story, but what journalists will do will take the complete extremes of the story so that both sides are happy. And then paid to persuade is they're designed to persuade public and public officials. So it's kind of like I feel like they're advertising their information just so they get all the attention of it. You have to be careful on who you do trust. People trust people close to them. It helps to a point, but also depends on what the subject is. Say if I want to know something close to home, I'm going to trust my friends and family and peers. But if I want to find out about national security, I should probably look at New York Times or something that pertains to that. But there's a thing called being too cynical. A lot of people just block out media today because a lot of it is who gets out the news first, and it's not completely checked through, and it's not thorough. But according to Dan Gilmore, we cannot be too cynical, blocking out all media we think is false. That gives the worst people even more leeway. And it's true, if we don't pay attention, don't ask questions, they'll make people just write whatever they want. And you can stay away from untrustworthy media. Stick with credible sources. If you stick with topic-specific aggregation, this helps because it has it's information from experts. Common sense is a really good way. And then there's credibility scale. That's in Media Active in Chapter 3. Negative would be an anonymous comment on a blog. Citizen media, which would be 0, would be blog. The New York Times is at a 30. I think Scott Rosenberg's list from Media Active paraphrased is the best at rating of what you can say is credible and not getting lost in lies of media. And you can ask yourself, does the site tell you who runs it? Is someone taking responsibility for being published? And investigate the person and or company. Are the ads relevant to the main purpose of the site? You can look up the Internet Archive. Did it once reveal information that it now hides? And look at the source code. Now, hopefully this is helpful to you, and so you don't get lost in media and fall for a lot of its tricks. Thank you.
This information in the web can be a little overwhelming and create the sense of, oh, I don't know what to do, too much information, and many people can freak out, which is why media literates must be able to determine what is useful and beneficial to them. So yes, taking advantage of the easy access information is crucial, and it can be done instantly, trying to find information. But the information that media literates must look at is information that they can use for decision making, for their personal, professional, or social lives. So they need to find information that is relevant to them, that suits their individual life, so they can narrow down this feeling of being overwhelmed by all this news, all this information that the web creates. The idea of informatic literacies also come into play, and as I mentioned before, it's important for media literates to adopt a selective approach in seeking information that it's going to be beneficial to them. So they need to filter information in their own way. Also, developing skills for categorizing the information and locating it is crucial, and it can be done. And then the third part of not being overwhelmed is looking at the message that the media is trying to produce. Evaluation is a crucial skill, so you need to look at the content and see who is producing it, make a distinction between what a professional is making and what an ordinary citizen can make. Looking for the message is also an important part, because you need to find the purpose of the message so you can understand the information and not be overwhelmed with it. So what does the author want you to know, to be aware of? And then you can interpret this based on your experiences or prior knowledge. Once the message is clear to you, then as a media literate, you can evaluate the information to see if it's valuable and beneficial to you.
Ever heard the term expand your horizon? Well, that's exactly how we internet users should view the big World Wide Web. Unfortunately, many of us are too scared to venture out past the sites we know and trust. But is that enough? Many of us experience the echo chamber effect, which Dan Gilmore defines in his book Mediactive as the notion that democratized media have given us a way to pay attention only to the people we know will agree with, paying no attention to contrary views or often reality. However, this can pose an issue. Many websites are created under a certain bias and allow their visitors to believe in that bias. No matter how factual they may presume, lots of sites can be out of date and just plain wrong. Dan Gilmore tells us how to expand our horizon by really doing just that, only he tells us to go outside our comfort zone. This is easier said than done, so next time you're reading the latest articles on your go-to websites, try the following points. To explain this effect in a broader sense of the word, I related it to the term tribalism. This is a way of thinking or behaving in which people are more loyal to their tribe than to their friends, their country, and any other social group. Well, I'm sure most of us are still wondering how we can still avoid these biases in our digital media. FAIR.org is a national media watch group that has been offering well-documented criticism of media bias and censorship since 1986, and they provide multiple questions one can ask themselves to detect the biases. Who are the sources? Is there a lack of diversity? From whose point of view is the news reported? Are there double standards? Do stereotypes skew coverage? What are the unchallenged assumptions? Is there a lack of context? Is the language loaded? Do headlines and stories match? Or are the stories and important issues featured prominently? However, if you're still feeling a little sketchy or unsure about the site you claim to be 100% fact, Dan Gilmore gives a perfect recommendation to figure it out. Do the research. When you're on your favorite website next, check it out. What does it entail? Does the site have a hyperlink? If so, click around and see what you find. When you do, there's a good chance you'll discover that you either didn't have a sufficiently deep understanding of something or what you thought was simply wrong.